For context, I'm a 5'3" female, and I was 18 when this happened. I'm 20 now, and thinking about this makes my heart race still. It was late on a summer night, and I had been hanging out with some of my guy friends at the skate park. We were smoking weed, and the other guys were downing beers as usual. Normally, my twin sister would be with us, as she is my best friend and great friends with these guys as well. But she was out with her boyfriend that night. The guys were talking about using their fake IDs to go to a bar. Since the legal drinking age here is 19, none of us would legally be able to get in, so I decided to call it a night. I had no interest in that, and I didn't even have a fake ID. When I told the guys, they offered to skate beside me while I biked, and I declined, telling them that I'd just bike home fast and they'd probably just slow me down. They skated off and told me to text one of them when I was home. I put my headphones in and sped off. I had been biking for about 10 minutes and was about 5 more away from home when I came to a stoplight, and in my head, I cursed the old man who sat on a bench near the crosswalk. I had wanted to bike through the red light, but I didn't want to give him a reason to think, stupid teenagers. So I stopped my bike, and he gave me an oddly large smile. I felt a chill go down my spine, but I noticed he had a cane perched upon his lap. Oh, he's harmless, I thought. I bet he can barely walk. I looked at the light again, and a big red hand stared back at me. I can't cross still. When I looked back at his face, he said something. That's when I realized I still had music blasting through my earbuds. I took one out, but as I did, the old man stood up with his cane. He stood there for a second, about 10 feet away from me, using the cane for balance. "Pardon, sir?" I said. Suddenly, he dropped the cane, and I barely had time to process it when I saw him sprinting at me. I froze for a second. My feet wouldn't move. Then, they were scrambling, struggling to get a grip on the pedals. I ended up going through the red light, but that was the furthest thing from my mind at this point. I just kept biking as fast as I could. I didn't look back until I couldn't hear his footsteps anymore. When I did look back, he was speed walking toward his bench, and the cane he clearly did not fucking need. I have no idea why he sprinted at me, and I still wonder what he said to me. I wonder more what his intentions were. To assault me? Kidnap me? Did he have a weapon? It all seems so odd, because he truly looked so frail sitting on that bench with his cane. So, to that old man, I hate you. Please, oh please, let's not meet. This is going to be a long one since I've never managed to put the whole story together clearly until now. This happened in a relatively small town or city in Canada in April of 2016, just right before I graduated high school. I was 17 at that time. It was my grad year, and most of the people in my grad class were partying and planning activities to celebrate our upcoming graduation. One of the traditions in my town is to play a grad game called Rambo, which is basically a version of Predator Prey. A bunch of people would meet up at a location on one side of the city, and the goal was for the runners to make it to a spot on the other side of the city without getting caught by the seekers, which were groups of 3 to 4 in their cars. Runners also went in groups of 3 to 4, but they had to be on foot. My grad class was around 200 people, and I would say this particular night there were about 60 to 70 people playing. This takes place after it's completely dark outside, and I think about 11 p.m. that night. I had planned to be a runner in a group of 4 with my boyfriend at that time, as well as my friend and her boyfriend. However, my now ex-boyfriend bailed last minute to go do drugs at a different party with his friends, which left me as a third wheel with my friend and her man. No problem, right? I should have never gone. Now, for reference, I am tiny, like I am 4'11", and I weighed around 80 pounds at that time. I genuinely look like I'm around 13 if I don't wear makeup and if you don't get a good look at me. Anyways, me and my friend got all dressed up in black and put war paint on our cheeks, and the 3 of us headed to the spot. I live in what I always considered a safe town, mostly full of families or retired people, and there are only a few baddish neighborhoods in the city. The game started, and we all ran, and all was fun, until about an hour in midnight that we had to cross through one of the said neighborhoods. While we were walking along our residential street sidewalk, one of the seeker cars came ripping down the street, and the 3 of us ran. Of course, my friend and her man stayed together, and I got separated somehow in the scuffle. Once the seekers weren't in the immediate area, I started calling out to my friends, and I could hear their voices somewhere in the distance. I texted my friend, and she said they were in an alley on the other side of the houses, while I was still on the sidewalk in front. I had 2 options. I could walk to the end of the block and find the alley that way, but I was about 20 houses away in either direction. I knew for a fact that there were seekers nearby who had seen us and knew that we were in the area. My other option was to cut through someone's yard and immediately be in the alley and reunite with my group. Why I did this, I will never know. Like I said, I'm a tiny little girl, and this was known to be a rough neighborhood. I looked at the nearest houses and spotted one that didn't have a front gate. His lawn went straight into the backyard, save for a few shrubs on the side of the house. I thought this might mean that I can go straight through and that there wouldn't be a back fence. I chose this house and stepped over the shrubs and jogged towards the back. As I did, a motion light came on that illuminated the backyard. This scared me, but I was already in, so I figured I would just get out as fast as possible. When the light came on, however, I noticed that there was in fact a fence, and about a 6 to 7 foot tall one at that. I certainly couldn't jump it, but there was a gate with a latch that I ran into. I remember having to stand on my tippy toes to even reach the latch. While fumbling with the latch, I heard a noise. It was the sound of the back door of the house opening. The houses in this area were quite small and often dilapidated. I would say that back door was only around 15 feet from the fence. It had some concrete stairs with wrought iron railings. I remember turning my head towards the noise and having around 1 second to see this gigantic bald man in his stained white briefs charging at me from his front door. He was at least 6'5" and well over 300 pounds. He hit me like a freight train. He slammed into me so that I hit the fence hard. I think he came at me with his hands neck height, but I can't remember for sure. What I do remember vividly, though, was how he picked me up, my full body weight by my neck. I remember trying to shriek and hearing my own voice barely choking out a sound. He immediately started towards the door he came from. As he dragged me towards his house, I remember being sure that something horrific was going to happen to me and that I was going to die. I remember his hairy, sweaty body absorbing my kicks and attempts to hit him, and I was trying to scream the whole time, but both his hands around my neck was an unescapable silencing death trap. Right in front of his steps, my iPhone flew out of my hoodie pocket and hit the concrete, reminding me of its existence altogether. But now, it was sitting on the ground as he hauled me up the stairs. I still don't know how I mustered the strength, but that wrought iron railing gave me something to finally leverage myself against. I managed to pull myself away from his grasp using that fence just long enough to grab my phone. His hand slipped off my neck but caught my hoodie's neckline, which tore to my sternum. I was wearing another shirt underneath. This hoodie is still the grim reminder of this day. For some reason, I can't throw it away. Now, he immediately caught me again, but in my mind, I was for sure going to die if I didn't even have my phone to somehow call help or something. But being out of his grasp allowed for another thing. I could scream. I knew my friends were somewhere in that back alley, and I screamed bloody murder at the top of my lungs once I could. He caught me again and dragged me into his house, and I vaguely remember him trying to cover my mouth or grab my throat again, but I'm not sure. Upon entering his house, I saw where he was taking me. The steps into his pitch-black basement were only about 4 feet from his back door, and he was headed straight for it. I was certain that I was going to be dragged into his rape or murder dungeon, and no one would ever see me again. This freak had 1 foot down the stairs when he heard it. Before his back door fully shut, there came a sound from outside that I believed saved my life. It was my friend calling my name. They heard me screaming, and they were very close to the yard that I was in. So naturally, they started freaking out and calling my name, and this guy heard them. He froze in his tracks, eyes fixed out the back door now, when he realized that I wasn't alone. All at once, he let go of me and stepped in front of the door, blocking my escape back through it. But then, he started asking me all sorts of questions like he was in a frenzy. "Why were you in my yard? You were stealing and vandalizing, weren't you?" I was pretty messed up, but started trying to explain the game that I was playing, referring heavily to the fact that I was with a group of friends and I was just trying to cut through his yard. I was now able to get a good look at him, completely naked aside from some stained saggy white briefs. After about 30 seconds, my friends called my phone, and I have never picked up a call so fast. I immediately started yelling at her that I am in someone's house and he's trying to kidnap me, what the house looked like, and many more. I stayed back from him and stayed on the phone with my friend while he was screaming at me that he performed a civilian's arrest because I was vandalizing his property. He repeatedly threatened to call the police, to which I said, "Please do," every time. The police would get me out of his house, but he never did call them. But he made me write my name on a piece of paper, which I did because I just wanted him to let me go. He kept me in his house, seemingly trying to figure out what to do, until around 2 minutes later, that there was a violent banging at his front door. My friends had found his house and were just going to town on this guy's door. Then he finally let me go out the back door. I promptly threw up on his front lawn from nerves as soon as I was reunited with my friends. Well, my gift to him. This is what happened after the incident. I understand that I was trespassing, but I was not stealing or vandalizing. What he did, I believe to be assault and unlawful confinement, not a civilian's arrest. And may I remind you that I am under 5 foot tall, standing on my little tippy toes to reach the gate, my long blonde hair hanging down my back. He knew I was a little girl, and I don't believe for a second that he truly thought that I was a threat to his property. I will never forget the way he stepped 1 foot into that basement. So it goes, the aftermath. Later, I had some bruises on my neck and my hair was coming out in clumps from where it had been ripped out during the struggle. And I was missing many of my piercings, including my belly ring somehow. This from the sheer violence of the altercation. I told my parents and whatnot about it and went to bed that night, but I don't think I slept. The next morning, my mom convinced me to go to the police. At the time, I remember wanting to just hide somewhere safe for the rest of eternity, but my mom convinced me that he can't just get away with what he did to me. I went to the police station, where I had to wait for around an hour to speak with a constable. Because I live in a smaller town, there aren't a lot of cops on duty on a Sunday, and the cop I would talk to was currently on another call. What we didn't know at that time was that my dad was the reason the cops were busy. Now, my dad kind of looks like a freak. He looks like a long-haired biker and drives old vintage cars with his sported exhaust, so they are as loud as a Harley. He was angry. He pulled up at this guy's house and apparently stood and stared into his front window for a long time. Then he headed to the back alley and did the same. I learned that this guy had multitudes of security cameras all over his house, and my dad apparently stared into one in the back for upwards of 8 minutes without moving. The guy called the cops on my dad, who left just as they showed up. This guy then gave a statement to the cops before I got to, claiming that I had been vandalizing his property and were sending people to further mess with his house. Of course, he had no evidence of vandalism, and only my dad being freaky as evidence that anyone was going to mess with him. He told the officers that he did not have footage of the altercation, which I think is bullshit. He just didn't want them to see him attacking me and dragging me into his house. The same cops came back to the station where I was waiting, and before I got to give any statement, they described my dad to me and asked if I knew him. I told them it was my dad, and they said, "We don't know who you are affiliated with, but you need to leave this man alone." I remember being taken aback by this, because here I was to give my statement, and they have already decided that this guy was the victim of the situation. I was pretty shell-shocked, and trying to tell the story clearly was tricky for me. The cop hardly wrote anything down, and then he basically threw the book at me. He told me, "You are the one trespassing. Do you understand that Mr. X could press charges on you?" I was flabbergasted. I'd literally been attacked, had bruises on my neck, a torn sweater, hair falling out in clumps as evidence, and the cop said I was the criminal. This scared the shit out of me because I had ambitions for the future which could not include any kind of record. So this shut me up, and I agreed to let it go and left the station. In hindsight, I think the cops really did not want to deal with the situation and just wanted it to go away, and they succeeded. For a few years, I was terrified of seeing this man again and was convinced that he was going to eventually show up at the post office that I worked at, but he never did. My dad continued to drive slowly past his house from time to time, including the alley, and even got one of his actual biker friends to park right out front and smoke a cigarette while looking at the house. The cop showed up on him, but it's not illegal to pull over and have a smoke. I like to think this guy lived in fear that the Hells Angels were after him, at least for a while. I coped by kind of convincing myself that this was his messed up idea of a civilian's arrest and that he wasn't trying to kidnap me. But telling the story reminds me that that may have not been the case. I've never told the story in full before, so if you made it this far, thanks for reading. I really wish I didn't have to write this down, but I don't think I'll be getting much sleep tonight anyway. So I figured that I might share with you what's going on in my house right now. A couple of points relevant to the story. First, I'm a student who is currently pursuing his higher education abroad. The country I reside in is the Netherlands. Next, I live with two other people whose rooms are on the same floor as mine. One flatmate in particular is slightly problematic, but more on that later. Another one is that I cannot possibly go out because there's a curfew in place, and if I go out, I risk facing a fine. And lastly, I live on the third floor, and the living room is located on the second floor. I work from home, and I took a break from work to go and wash my plate in the kitchen. I usually eat in my room because I want to be close to my laptop in case something at work happens. The kitchen is located right next to the living room on the second floor, and in order to get there, I need to go downstairs and move through the living room. Please keep in mind that it's 11 p.m. here in the Netherlands, so it's pretty dark outside. So I go down and I turn on the lights in the kitchen without turning the lights in the living room on. I'm already pretty familiar with the route to the kitchen, despite the darkness, as I have been living here for approximately a year and a half now. I washed my plate, and right as I'm about to leave the kitchen, I turn off the lights, and I see a silhouette getting up from the couch, and then lying down again. This is the moment when my heart sank and when I started wondering if I'm seeing things. I wasn't brave enough to check and see what's going on, so I lowered my body down and really quietly went upstairs. I was literally crawling on the stairs at one point. So I finally reach my floor, and then I knock on one of my flatmates' room. I respect his privacy, and I will not share any details about his appearance. But for the sake of clarity, I am going to refer to him as Kevin from now on. Now, Kevin is a fascinating individual, to say the least. He has 3 kids from multiple women, and according to him, there's a 4th one on the way. He is generally nice, but he tends to get crazy drunk, and some of the parties he throws at our place tend to be incredibly loud and unpleasant for the rest of the tenants. After our landlord warned him, he no longer seems to invite people over. Thank God for that. But he still gets drunk pretty frequently, and it's usually a mess. I'm not going to share more stories, but based on my experiences, I assume that if there's anyone that knows what the fuck is going on downstairs, it would be him. So Kevin opens the door, and I ask him if he knows anything about the person sleeping on the couch in the living room. I have calmed down a bit since. At first, I reached the conclusion that this is one of Kevin's friends who simply crashed at our couch. No big deal, but I wanted to make sure just in case. Turns out, I was only halfway there. This person is in fact here because of Kevin, but they're not a friend of Kevin. They're a homeless person that were found by Kevin on his way home today, and they have never met each other before. But Kevin felt bad for them and offered them to sleep on the couch at our place for the night. I am fucking speechless. I don't mind having people over every now and then, and I have nothing against homeless people, but I think that inviting a complete stranger over to spend the night at your place without at least discussing this with your flatmates is somewhat inconsiderate, well, to say the least. Moreover, there's a fucking pandemic raging on worldwide, so this whole situation isn't exactly in our best interest either. I did consider going to a friend's place and spending the night there, but I'm not really interested in going downstairs for the time being. Plus, I risk getting a fine, as going out after 9 p.m. here is prohibited. So yeah, here we are now. I apologize for any grammatical errors, but English is not my native tongue. Plus, I don't really feel like spell checking at this moment. It's relatively quiet now. Let's hope it's going to stay that way. I never told anyone important about this because I'm not sure if anyone around me would believe me. And also, it's been so long. This is my first post on here, so I apologize if this is hard to read. I'm 24 years old now, but this happened when I was maybe 12 or 13. When I was younger, I would always lie to my mom about where I was going for the night, although my plans were to stay out late past curfew with my buddy Corey. I would say, "I'm sleeping over at Corey's house," and he would tell his mom the same. We've been caught a couple times, but this was before ever getting caught. My mom lives in this nice development of townhouses. She still lives there, and sometimes walking around the development to this day brings me chills about what I experienced that one night. Corey and I were walking around the town, hitting up with friends, meeting with friends, and just doing stupid shit since I was young. After everyone else had enough sense to go home after a while, Corey and I would either go back to my mom's development and play a half-assed manhunt, or fuck with any cars coming in or out of the development. I wish we hadn't done that. This night, we went back to my mom's development, and we noticed a black BMW driving pretty slow into the neighborhood. We assumed it was an old person or whatnot, but Corey told me, this looks like an undercover cop. And being the idiot that I was, or maybe just wanting the thrill, I believed him. We ran and hid behind bushes and trees, behind some rows of townhouses. We were still in play mode. But we noticed something. This black BMW is certainly onto us and is driving very slow and always around where we were. We were now certain that this was some sort of cop or someone who would get us in trouble, but we were very, very wrong. In the midst of running around and trying to hide from his car, we ran across one of the streets and he caught us dead in our tracks. I fucking dipped. I ran and yelled at Corey to hurry up or we'd get in trouble and caught being out past curfew. But Corey just stood there. I was so confused. Why would you give up now? I hid behind a bush and watched, but kept yelling for him to join me or dip. The black BMW turned its hazard lights on, and I noticed a figure in black get out of the car. Then a yell of a grown man's voice. "Where the fuck do you think you're going?" It scared the shit out of me. I was ready for my buddy Corey to get placed in the back of an undercover cop car, and I was ready for his mom to call my mom, and that would be it for me. But as this guy walked closer, I noticed he wasn't in uniform if he was a cop, just casual black clothes, not a uniform of any sort. I was confused. Then I see this man push Corey on the ground. That was when my adrenaline was rushing like crazy, so I ran out to try and stop it, but instead, he just pushed me to the side and left me on the ground. He was wailing on my friend Corey. I was screaming, and I expected people to come running out, but nobody came out. He threw Corey into the passenger seat of the car and drove off. I was panicking. I didn't know what to do. On my way home, with tears in my eyes, and running where it feels like I can't breathe, I hear the BMW racing up the street to me. He gets beside me and lets Corey get out. Corey, in tears and scared for his life, ran up next to me. The man yelled out, "Go home and get the fuck to bed. If I see you out here again, it will be the last." And then he drove off angrily. Corey and I are not very close to this day, and this experience was something that he never liked to talk much about. He was in the car with a guy for maybe 1 minute max, and I don't know if that guy knew Corey personally, or if he was just some asshole who decided that he was gonna mentally and physically fuck with some kids late at night, but we kept everything from our parents. We told friends at school and on the bus, but nobody ever believed us. They would just laugh and ask patronizing questions. I don't think about this as often as I should maybe, but when I decide to take a stroll in the development that my mom lives in, once in a while, I'll think about that horrific moment for Corey and I. So to the man who drove the black BMW and scared my buddy and I to a living hell, please, let's not meet again. I recently quit my job at a well-known Canadian store franchise, auto parts and home improvement, and many more. I was a 17-year-old cashier, and because the city that I live in has no or very few Walmarts, I guess all the people who go to Walmart come here instead. Our uniforms are by no means revealing or suggestive, but I guess the fact that I don't have a resting bitch face made me a larger target for wackos. I think the first time I noticed someone following me was on my way to work at about 4 p.m. This was a solid 1-kilometer walk. I probably wouldn't have noticed if the guy wasn't so obvious about it. He was wearing all black, which isn't uncommon, but his behavior is what really ticked me off. I was running a little late to work and sped up my pace. This man too sped up his pace to be within 1 to 2 feet of me. I think, oh, he's trying to pass me on the sidewalk. I'll just go on the grass and slow down. I do so, and he follows me onto the grass. When I look behind at him and make direct eye contact, he doesn't so much as nod at me. He just continues staring at me with some weird amusement in his eyes. I can hear him breathing. We're next to a busy street, and I can hear his breathing over the sound of an industrial truck. Keep in mind, this is in the middle of a pandemic, so please stay at least 2 meters away from me at all times. I then quicken my pace to the point where I'm halfway between power walking and jogging. When I look behind at him, he's trying to keep up with my threatened pace, but I'm managing to put up some distance between us. Unfortunately, this did not last for long. As I approached the intersection, there was another woman there, and I desperately tried to make eye contact with her, but I fail. I look behind me, and he's really way too close to my face. I stepped into the street a bit just to put some distance between us, and he still has that weird look in his eye. Thankfully, the crosswalk signal turns on, and I walk as fast as I possibly can. The man is now jogging, trying to keep up with me. I turn to go in the car park, and I manage to lose him for a little bit. All the while, I'm still repeating, fucking run, bitch, over and over in my head. I look behind me, and he's made it into the parking lot, so I essentially stop trying to not look crazy and just run through the store doors and wait for an elevator. Right as I make it into the elevator and the doors are closing, I see the man walk into the store, staring at me while the elevator doors close. This isn't the only story I plan to tell. There was also a guy at my work in a red puffy jacket who was recording me. While I was ringing a customer up, the customer suddenly approached me and discreetly asked, did you know that man is recording you? When I asked what he said, a man over there in a red jacket is pretending to take pictures of items, but he keeps raising his phone above the shelf and recording you. I look over, and sure enough, someone's trying to record me and failing to be discreet about it. I thank the customer for letting me know, and I call the manager while making eye contact with the man. I don't know why he was recording me. I'm not famous or anything. I'm 17, and he's only recording me. Why? I have zero idea, and I still have no clue. If anyone has any info on creepers recording random girls and why they do that, I'd greatly appreciate it if they'd enlighten me. I was fully clothed, nothing was off about my face, and there's nothing that would make me otherwise stand out among the other 5 cashiers on the floor. When the man got to a cashier, one of my managers approached him and asked to look at his phone. He refused, saying that he was only taking pictures of products and wasn't recording anyone. And so, they let him go. Later that day, I bought a knife, because honestly, taking public transport at 10 p.m. is whack sometimes, especially when there's junkies, guys beating up their friends, abandoned buildings right behind your bus stop, and other things that go bump in the night. I quit my job because I didn't feel safe anymore there. The fact that they let our shifts end at 10 p.m. was definitely also a reason why. So, man with a red jacket, and the man dressed in all black, and numerous subway junkies. Let's not meet again. And to the guy who pointed out the guy filming me, you're a true ally, but I hope we never meet under similar circumstances again. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. I would also like to thank my following patrons: Fire05, Gabriel, Maskino, Ralph, Lori, and Jake. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it. If you want to support the channel further, you can be a patron too. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.